Let's head into our top story this morning. Now, Breonna Taylor's name has become a rallying cry for the Black Lives Matter movement. Taylor was shot multiple times by officers who burst into her home on March 13 during a narcotics investigation, and now a grand jury has indicted just one of the 3 police officers involved in her fatal shooting. The Fayette, Kentucky police officer, Brett Hankinson, has been indicted on criminal charges in the case, but not for her death, while 2 other white policemen who fired into the apartment of Breonna Taylor will not be prosecuted for her death because their use of force was justified. A third, Brett Hankinson, has been charged with endangering her neighbors. 3 felony counts and bail set at $15,000. A warrant was issued for his arrest.
The Jefferson County Grand Jury charges as follows. Count 1. Wanton endangerment in the first degree. On or about March 13, 2020 in Jefferson County, Kentucky, the above named defendant, Brett Hankinson, committed the offense of wanton endangerment in the first degree when, under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to human life, he wantonly shot a gun into the apartment occupied by initials CE.
Kentucky's Black State Attorney General choked up when answering questions at a news conference about why no police officers are facing criminal charges in Breonna Taylor's death. Cameron said that as a black man, he understands how important it was to make sure that justice was delivered in the case.
I know that many in Louisville and across the Commonwealth, I understand that as a black man, how painful this is. And which is why it was so incredibly important for make sure that we did everything we possibly could to uncover every fact. And I know, look, this team, myself, the members of the representatives of the Attorney General's office have taken a lot of criticism and scrutiny. But that scrutiny in many ways was misplaced because there was not a day that people in this office didn't go to sleep thinking about this case.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump welcomed Kentucky governor's decision to call in the National Guard after prosecutors cleared the police officers of criminal charges.
Really brilliant Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron is doing a fantastic job. I think he's a star. And he made a statement that I'll just read. Justice is not often easy. It does not fit the mold of public opinion, and it does not conform to shifting standards. I understand he's called up the National Guard, which is a good thing. I think it's a very positive thing, and it'll all work out.
Angry, confused and shedding tears, demonstrators resumed their protest after the ruling. Protesters spent months calling for prosecution of police officers in the fatal shooting of Breonna Taylor. And upon hearing the news of the ruling, many gathered in the square and began to cry, expressing their confusion and sorrow. They exclaimed that they had seen this coming. Following this, police in riot gear clashed with protesters who had gathered to demand justice. Now, for more on this news development coming about the verdict in Breonna Taylor's fatal shooting case, we are now being joined by Jagriti Dave live from Washington, D.C. Jagriti, thank you so much for joining us. This verdict effectively means that while a former police officer was indicted only on first-degree wanton endangerment charges for his action, the 2 other officers who also fired shots at that botched March raid were not indicted, meaning that effectively no officer was really charged with killing 26-year-old Breonna Taylor. So tell us about the on-ground situation in Kentucky.
Well, currently there are protests underway. Louisville police say that an officer has been shot in the protests in response to that have been sparked by the grand jury's ruling. They're not giving the condition of that officer, but this has been an emotional result for many people. Many Black Lives Matter activists have been calling for stronger charges levied against the officers involved in the shooting. The family were calling for manslaughter charges, but that has not been the case. And the authorities in Kentucky have implemented a state of emergency. There's been a curfew in place overnight, and there are protests that are expected and underway in many cities across the United States, including Washington, D.C. and New York.
Right. Now, President Donald Trump has praised the Kentucky Republican Attorney General Daniel Cameron and even called him a star. So how are the president's remarks being perceived, especially in the run-up to the elections?
Well, the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests are one of the many election topics that are front and centre in the run-up to November the 3rd. Obviously, the coronavirus pandemic is one of the other central topics, and the issue of law and order has been at the forefront of the Trump campaign. They have been pitching the president as the president of law and order. He has been backing the police front and centre as there have been protests underway since the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis.
Right. Now, this fatal shooting, as we all know, has sparked global outrage. And despite the settlement in the case earlier, many view this verdict as a complete denial of justice with no reference, especially with reference to the Black Lives Matter movement. So what really lies ahead for these protesters? Will we see more demonstrations in the next few days and possible violence, perhaps?
Well, that is what the local authorities in Louisville, Kentucky, were preparing for. They knew that there was likely to be reaction to the grand jury ruling. Indeed, and Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron intimated to that point in his preamble before announcing the grand jury's decision. It was clear the way he was talking that he understood that there was going to be a lot of people who are unhappy with the ruling. And as we're seeing in terms of the protests that have been sparked and the reaction, the emotional reaction from many activists and celebrities and people who have invested themselves in this particular case, there are many people who are indeed unhappy with the result. The Attorney General in Kentucky, he talked about in his speech saying mob justice is not justice, suggesting that the overwhelming public pressure to act is not justice in his view. But people who have been protesting and calling for justice for Breonna Taylor will see it differently.
Right, Jagriti, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for all your insights on this story.